Hello all, welcome to Sid the Sloth Show, and we are here today with a couple of llamas named Sparkle and Flower. We are here because Sparkle has a secret that he wants to share, and he needs to let it out, and he says he's been holding it in for 8 years. Sparkle?
Yeah, I came on today because I have a secret that I've been keeping from Flower that I need to tell, and it's been like 8 years, and it's been killing me that I haven't said anything about it, but I need to let it out. I need to let this secret go.
Okay.
So, I'm Flower, and I think we're okay. I mean, we've been together for like 8 years. We're a couple of really good llamas, and I just cannot see Sparkle keeping anything from me. I mean, we share everything with each other. We're just a couple of really awesome llamas.
Okay, I see.
Well, the secret is... Oh my god, you do have a secret? How dare you? How dare you keep something from me? I'm secretly an alpaca. Oh my god, you're a dirty, dirty alpaca. How dare you keep this from me? Why? Why would you keep this from me? Why, Sparkle?
So you think that he is now a dirty, dirty alpaca. Okay. And how does that make you feel, knowing that you know that secret?
I feel betrayed. Betrayed and hurt, Sid.
Yeah, I just want to say that I agree because I think that alpacas are just dirty, dirty animals. And, you know, they spit, and we all know that they have bad temperaments. We all know that alpacas are bad animals because they have a bad temperament, and they're terrible. They're terrible. We all know this. And we all know that llamas are better. They're just better.
Why, Sparkle? Why would you keep this from me? Well, I know you like llamas, and I wanted to be a llama, and I can't hide the fact that I'm an alpaca anymore.
Okay. Well, guess what, Sparkle? You aren't the only one with the secret today. Flower.
You have a secret too? I wasn't supposed to share my secret. We were only here for yours. Why am I sharing mine too? No, you have to share your secret. What is your secret? I need to know your secret. Well, I'm secretly a lamb chop.
Let's go check with the audience. Look, I just don't understand why you guys didn't know this about each other after 8 years. I mean, it's been 8 years, and I just think it's messed up that you guys have not talked to each other this whole time. How do you go this long and you don't know that the other one is an alpaca? I mean, really. You don't see me coming up and suddenly saying, look, I'm a shrimp.
I mean, the thing is, if we're gonna live our truth, then I gotta live my truth, and he has to live his, but I just can't be with an alpaca. I mean, I know that not all alpacas are bad, but I mean, they spit, they're terrible, they steal, they kick, they're so bad-tempered, and llamas are so awesome. Oh my god, how are you so anti-alpaca? You are so horrible. Did it mean nothing to you? Nothing? What? Sid, where's the bouncers?
Okay, I see. Yes, Sid, yeah, I see. And I just want to say that alpacas are not bad. We think alpaca bad, but they are not all bad. There are good alpaca, just like there are good llama. Both are good. Spasiba.
Oh my god, you want to say that to my face? You come down here and fight me, yo. We said we were going to fight. You said you were going to be peaceful. Well, you know what? That went out the door when I found that you were an alpaca. A dirty, dirty alpaca. How dare you? Fight me!
Oh, I think we need to bring in the bouncers. Guys. So there you have it. 2 llamas who aren't actually llamas. Well, as you see, that's all we have time for today. So let's just go to our final thoughts.
What did we learn today? Alpacas are gentle animals too. Not all alpacas are the same. We need to embrace what makes each animal different. And sometimes we have to let out all the secrets that we hide within ourselves. I'm Sid the Sloth Puppet, and these have been my final thoughts.
Reality TV. Most of us know that it's overly produced and that the term reality is a bit of a joke. But prior to that was the quote trash TV like Jerry Springer, Jenny Jones, or the Rikki Lake Show. For those of us who were in school in the 90s, staying homesick meant that it was prime time to see such topics such as cold-hearted convicts, My Sister Stole My Boyfriend, Bachelor Party Hookup, I'm Addicted to Plastic Surgery, I Married a Horse, or My Twin Loves the Same Person I Do. It was shocking and meant to pull in an audience. More than that, guests could potentially be anyone from any background. It was one of the few venues that an average person could make an appearance if their situation was compelling enough. This type of media raises questions about exploitation and ethical representation of the participating audience and guests. While these types of talk shows allowed the possibility of anyone to participate, the current landscape of reality TV is a gentrified image of people that match a certain look and match a certain class, which, once again, pushes out those in the lower socioeconomic rungs of society. Due to copyright and other YouTube restrictions, I won't be able to use many clips from those particular talk shows. Also, I might have to unfortunately use terms that are deemed appropriate, such as essay instead of the actual term. Hopefully YouTube will find some way to work around these issues, because when a content creator has to work around that, it makes it easier to silence victims. Consider this the general warning for the video. Also, even though I'll point back to the Jerry Springer Show throughout this video, this topic is not just critiquing that show in particular, but rather referring to the general idea of talk shows that relied heavily on shock value and taboo subjects to draw in viewers while also encouraging strong emotional reactions. In using the term trash TV throughout, this is referring to a specific era and type of talk show. There's so much to cover that I couldn't include it in this video, but I'm going to try and focus more on items that are not discussed in other media, and of course all sources will be linked below. There are different articles and videos about how the algorithms for Facebook, TikTok, or YouTube veer users toward attractive and visually affluent people or particular topics. But trash TV didn't have an algorithm to work around, so drawing in viewers required a different approach. Why does seeing two trains crash into each other grab our attention? It's unusual, it's dramatic. Even as far back as the 1900s, true confession romance magazines and freak shows drew in a captive audience by using shock value in topics not unlike those of the trash TV talk shows. The difficulty is maintaining that audience over time, in part because trying to keep the same level of shock to grab our attention has to continually push boundaries. One way to grab attention is using the drama of human conflict and wanting to be involved in gossip. In Laura Grindstaff's book, The Money Shot, quote, "The three most common reasons for watching daytime talk shows given by producers are the same as those most frequently cited by journalists and media critics writing about talk shows in the press. 1. People identify with or want information about the problem or issue being discussed. 2. People like hearing about the problems of others because it makes them feel better about their own lives. 3. People are drawn to watch guests say and do things they themselves would never say or do on national television, the freak show gawk factor. People are drawn to the soap opera aspect of talk shows. They can't believe that such things go on in real life, that they have been invited in the privacy of their own homes to participate in someone else's dysfunction," end quote. Trash TV is basically the visual medium of the subreddit AITA. The way that this drama is framed matters. Even if someone hasn't worked in a soap opera, they're usually familiar with some of the tropes. Put a soap opera in a different setting and adaptation, and you get pro wrestling. There's usually not a lot of audience crossover between these two, but let me explain. Pro wrestling and soap operas are quite similar. There is conflict, drama, family, intense emotions, season-long plot lines, heel turns, and betrayal. Wrestling just happens to include hitting people with chairs and is seen as a lower class of television in comparison. For more information on how this affects the way we see literature and adaptations, I'll link that video here. However, TV executives usually care more about the business aspect, and while soap operas might be seen at a higher class level socially, there is the recognition that there is a sizable audience that prefers pro wrestling, which means more money.
Hello, I like money.
What inspired you to build a second Krusty Krab right next door to the original?
Money.
TV commentator Jeff Greenfield says, quote, "The most common misconception people have about television concerns its product. To the viewer, the product is the programming. To the television executive, the product is the audience," end quote. So how does this come into play when talking about the poor? In Framing Class by Diana Kendall, quote, "For the most part, people at the bottom of the class hierarchy remain out of sight and out of mind for most media audiences. Thematic framing depicts the poor and homeless as faceless statistics and reports on poverty. Episodic framing highlights some problems of the poor, but typically does not link their personal situations to such larger societal problems such as limited educational opportunities, high unemployment rates, and jobs that pay depressingly low wages," end quote. Trash TV was a different twist on human drama, but it was showing it in a way that was more free-form and unfiltered. Because it was more focused on bringing in viewers by using shock value, it was more open to allowing guests and audience members in from communities that were usually shut out from media. If a guest was able to act in an emotional way that grabbed an audience's attention, it didn't matter if they were poor, LGBTQ+, a person of color, Hispanic, overweight, or uneducated. According to Grindstaff, quote, "Given that ordinary people, by definition, belong to the private rather than the public domain, it is not surprising that some of them orient toward the genre this way. At some level, they are correct in assuming that being on television makes them somebody," end quote. While shows like Jerry Springer might have given a platform for these guests to have a voice, these shows also ride that line of exploiting their guests to achieve this goal. I'll circle back to this later. In Vice on TV's docuseries episode Trash TV, Dirty and Deadly Talk, the various participants discussed the hierarchy of different talk shows and what was considered trashy versus classy. The Oprah Winfrey Show was considered higher socially than the Jerry Springer Show. To be fair, most critics consider Jerry Springer to be at the bottom of the heap. That said, there are multiple overlapping reasons that guests would be persuaded to participate. Being a guest on these shows, even the Jerry Springer Show, came with a lot of perks. Free hotel, free meals, free airfare, who wouldn't want that? Even if it isn't a 5-star hotel, they weren't keeping guests at a sketchy motel run by Norman Bates on the outskirts of town. For many Americans, being able to travel is a luxury because it is expensive and time-consuming. If someone is living in a cheap apartment or trailer eating budget foods to survive day to day, the promise of free room and board is enticing. It could be the one chance in their life they'll be able to have this kind of luxury. There is also the lure of being on TV. Again, it might be their only opportunity to be on TV aside from maybe game shows. This is the 90s, and shows like American Idol didn't start until after 2000. The poor are, quote, faceless statistics in the news, and in the 90s there were few representations of poor people in sitcoms that weren't stereotyped. Even if they did have a character that was from a low socioeconomic background, they were simply part of the story plot for that episode and not part of the regular cast. In the TV show Moesha, the episode Home is Where the Car Is, the character Jason is a homeless student that manages to be valedictorian. He is rarely, if ever, mentioned in the rest of the series, and is an example of a good poor person. The fact that he is homeless is used to show that his struggles push him to work harder rather than question why he is in that situation in the first place. So when it comes to these type of talk shows, there seems to be the willing ignorance in acknowledging that these media venues allowed the visibility of the poor that they did not have access to otherwise. Even if there did happen to be a poor family or character, they were usually shown as uneducated and ignorant.
Hey, Brandine, you might could wear these to your job interview.
And scuff up the topless dancing runway? Nah, you best bring 'em back where from you got 'em.
Some guests also saw it as an opportunity to be able to get justice or confront another person, possibly in an environment that they felt safe to do so. The Money Shot has several examples throughout the book, such as Anita, a guest on the Jenny Jones Show, that wanted to resolve a conflict between her and her sisters where they had tried to obtain custody of her daughter because they believed Anita was an unfit mother. There was also Colleen that wanted to help her sister Tina leave her husband. Tina was 16 and her husband was twice her age, and they were living in a homeless shelter. Colleen wanted to give Tina a way out and had a plane ticket ready for her to leave him if she chose to do so during the taping. These are tough, messy situations. Access to therapy and mental health services is still pretty poor in 2022, but in the 90s they were far worse. Having the chance to be able to address tough situations like this is difficult, but if they're on stage with an audience and bouncers, it may or may not be better than trying to deal with this in their own home. Being able to get revenge publicly is also alluring. In the article Revenge and the People Who Seek It, quote, if your power seeker revenge can serve to remind others that you're not to be trifled with. If you live in a society where the rule of law is weak, revenge provides a way to keep order, end quote. I'm not going to go into all the issues with the law and how it negatively affects the poor and marginalized groups the most. There are plenty of other videos that discuss this. In Anita's case, her sisters had tried to use the legal system to get custody of her daughter and failed, so the chance to appear on this show gave them another route to try. In the case of Fran, she wanted to use her appearance as an opportunity to try and strengthen her case in exposing scammers, while also educating others to avoid the same situation. She had hoped it would push the authorities to apprehend the scammers faster, but she said that the Oprah Winfrey Show staff advised her that she was not allowed to say the name of the scammers on air due to liability. Even during the show, she was barely allowed to participate outside of answering a couple of short questions. Not only did she not get to provide any education about avoiding scammers, she was unable to use this as a chance to get justice for her case. With that segue, let's discuss some of the other downsides of being a guest. One of the difficulties for producers is arranging guests to be on the show. Since many of the guests on shows like Jerry Springer were from low-income backgrounds, the logistics can be a nightmare. This includes asking for time off work, arranging daycare, arranging aid for elderly family members, organizing a route to the airport, packing luggage, and miscellaneous errands. This is assuming the guest is not homeless, which adds another layer of complexity. During college, I had volunteered at a homeless shelter and was told that sometimes the state of the shelter is a reflection of the chaos in their lives. When someone has a chaotic life, trying to maintain a sense of order is a tremendous struggle. If a producer wants to bring on a guest that was homeless, they had to plan around the inconsistency of their daily life. Those who were not homeless were still difficult to get a hold of. Even though I'll mention this throughout, again, it's the 90s. Cell phones were not commonplace. The Nokia cell phone that could break cement came out in 1992. If a guest had a landline but was unable to pay their phone bill, they could not be reached by phone. Do I need to mention why email wouldn't work?
Hello? Yeah. Yeah, I'm in the library, yeah. Yeah, now you're cracking up. You're in the dark, yeah. I can't talk. I'm in the library, for Christ's sake. Yeah. Shut up.
It was also not uncommon for guests to be incarcerated before taping. If they wanted the guest to appear badly enough, though, the show would pay to bail them out. Assuming a guest is able to get past of all of these hurdles, then there is travel. Even though free travel and free hotel is a perk for some, it can drive up the anxiety for others. If a guest has never traveled by air before, all the nuances of air travel can be overwhelming and terrifying. In the Money Shot quote, Lena, the travel coordinator at Diana, told me countless stories about getting paged at all hours by people who had misplaced tickets, missed their flights, lost their luggage, wanted to change their arrival or departure times, or simply could not remember where they were supposed to go or when they were supposed to get there. End quote. This is the 90s. Plane security didn't involve removing your shoes yet, but cell phones and smartphones were not commonplace, so plane tickets were usually printed. A guest would have to write everything down or hope that they remember it. Making a TV show is fast-paced, so a guest that is not used to travel is already in a more vulnerable state before even getting to the studio. Once in the studio, things move quickly and guests can get overwhelmed. Combine this with producers amping up guests to be emotional on stage. Then, when a guest has an outburst or physical reaction, it's not just that moment in time, but rather it's the buildup of their emotions and anxieties from the past couple of days, if not longer. A viewer sees a momentary burst of emotion, but for the guest it's been a process that has worn them down enough to put down their guard and act in ways they generally would not. Under normal circumstances, being able to regulate emotions can be difficult, and these guests are under a lot of stress. This environment opens up a situation where a guest can be exploited or re-traumatized. Grindstaff brings up the quote, Cindy Brady disease to refer to guests who freeze or don't speak once on stage. Some of the topics on trash TV involve guests being on stage with their abusers. In cases where the guest shut down as a response to their trauma, it made the show less dramatic and producers needed a way to work around this. During commercial breaks, producers would prod guests telling them, this is your chance to speak, let your emotions out, or you should vent all these things you're keeping inside. This didn't always work, and there were guests that would shut down when confronted. Shutting down is a trauma response. In the Healthline article linked below, fight, flight, freeze, and fawn are the usual responses, though not every reaction will fit into these categories. Quote, when your body recognizes a threat, your brain and autonomic nervous system react quickly, releasing hormones like cortisol and adrenaline, end quote. Fight response can include shouting or bullying. Flight response can be leaving the situation or using a distraction to ignore it. When it comes to the freeze response, some experts will consider this the first reaction before fight or flight, as it is a type of pause before deciding next steps. This can also include mentally checking out if the situation is overwhelming. Lastly, the fawn response includes agreeing to whatever the other person wants while not sharing any thoughts or feelings that might anger them. To keep viewers watching, producers try to get the fight response. The other three aren't as thrilling. Speaking of viewers, part of the reason these shows were considered trash TV is that the people critiquing the shows saw the conflicts as frivolous or not real issues. I would argue that it was the presentation and the fact that the guests were ordinary people. During this era of trash TV, viewers could also tune in to watch the O.J. Simpson trial, the scandal of former President Clinton, and Anita Hill's scathing testimony of Justice Clarence Thomas. These events also revolved around scandalous conflicts, but the difference is that these involved people that had money, influence, and power. While I am not a queen that likes to watch, trash TV has a particular audience. Not just the audience at home, but also the studio audience who is hyped up just as much as the guests are. What made trash TV more unique was the ability for the audience to provide their thoughts on the situation and confront guests. Much like guests on the show, during commercial breaks, the audience would be prodded to react strongly. They were encouraged to shout, hiss, growl, curse, and let their emotions fly. That's why I prefer hockey to baseball. At least with hockey, the fans are just as entertaining as the game. The studio audience was also filled with people that were just as likely to be guests on the show. They didn't get a car, but the audience had a chance to participate and not just sit quietly. Being in the studio audience is one thing, but viewing the show at home has a different feel. Quick note on demographics. These were based on binary terms male and female, as that is what was collected at the time. The demographics of the viewers depended on the particular show. Jerry Springer and Rikki Lake had a nearly balanced mix of men and women under the age of 35 that included college students, blue-collar workers, and people of color. Oprah targeted women between the ages of 18 and 54, usually white and middle class. Maury Povich was aimed at those over the age of 55. In the beginning of these talk shows appearing, there wasn't a huge divide in the TV show topics between Jenny Jones, Jerry Springer, Oprah, and Geraldo Rivera, though each had their own twist. They would compete for the most shocking variation and try to be the first to cover it. However, after incidents such as the murder of Scott Amador, the various talk shows reacted in different ways. The Dark Side of the 90s and Trial by Media both cover this, so I'll leave it out for now. Geraldo Rivera shifted to more political topics and started wearing glasses to appeal to a different audience. Oprah changed direction to focusing more on celebrities instead of ordinary people. Both of these shows started to lose the audience from lower socioeconomic backgrounds. From the Money Shot quote, Oprah's ratings had dropped in part because she had lost touch with this audience. Viewers perceived that she had become a rich woman with her trainer and her cook and the whole bit, and consequently was no longer one of us, end quote. Contrast, the Jerry Springer Show dialed it up to 1,000. Instead of shirking the appearance of trash TV, this show embraced it and kept the train wreck going. This type of show fed into a sense of superiority in the viewing audience. Once again, those in the lower socioeconomic classes were more likely to be shut out from being a guest on certain shows, but there was always the Jerry Springer Show. The audience would look down on trash TV because it was usually poor and working class people who had lives worse off than their own, but they still watched it. In the 2017 Guardian article, quote, "It all starts with a psychology concept known as the fundamental attribution error. This is a natural tendency to see the behaviors of others as being determined by their character while excusing our own behavior based on circumstances. For example, if an unexpected medical emergency bankrupts you, you view yourself as a victim of bad fortune, while seeing other bankruptcy court clients as spendthrifts who carelessly had too many lattes. Or, if you're employed, you recognize the hard effort you put into seeking work, but view others in the same situation as slackers. Their history and circumstances are invisible from your own perspective," end quote. Categorizing people that participate in or watch trash TV as trashy makes it easier to create a division and class. The Jerry Springer Show didn't hide the people from lower socioeconomic backgrounds or pretend they didn't exist. People in marginalized groups already have difficulty in being visible. Ignoring the poor makes it easier to avoid our own fear of poverty being able to hit at any time. In the New York Times article by Tom Zeller, quote, "Fear of poverty rests at the very core of the American culture. The American dream is precisely the hope of rising from rags to riches. The media offer those who are not poor little guidance in reconciling the conflicting emotions toward poverty embedded within American culture, with its simultaneously sympathetic and impatient assumption that America offers the promise of escape from poverty to all who work hard," end quote. Trash TV and Cops shared a similarity in that these are shows that air people's dirty laundry. Middle-class viewers could see themselves as being above these shows because it was unlikely they would be in a police chase. In My Name is Earl, there are 2 episodes in the series that revolve around the townspeople hanging out at the bar waiting for their moment on TV. It's a sense of camaraderie, and it brings the community together. Showing the imperfect parts of our private lives is seen as something that the lower class does, quote, Middle and upper class folks too are frequently deviant and transgressive, experience heartache and tragedy, and have problems and conflicts. They are simply more reluctant to reveal these aspects of their lives on national television, and this reluctance is a part of what constitutes the upper classness. So by choosing certain kinds of topics and particular ways of framing them, talk shows create a natural constituency of potential guests who just happen to be lower class, end quote. What would a talk show be without experts? Grindstaff classified these as professional, organic, and scholar. In some shows, the expert is seated with the audience as a display to show that they are not above the viewers or participants in the show. Part of the difficulty in bringing in an expert is they need to be entertaining. Quote, "When it comes to experts, producers are looking for more than knowledge. It's not enough to know a lot about something. You also have to be able to say things in a concise way that's appealing to a larger audience. It's entertainment. You have to be able to perform. You have to be animated. So there are many wonderful scholars who just wouldn't make it on television because they would, they'd be too high on the snore scale," end quote. Scholars are those with expertise based in the academic or research side of things. Professional experts are those who work in a professional setting, such as a lawyer or therapist. Lastly, the organic expert is someone that has lived through a particular experience and use it as a way to educate or help others. The danger in bringing certain experts on a talk show and trying to make it entertaining is that the information being presented may be biased, incorrect, or even dangerous. The Oprah Winfrey Show begat the Dr. Phil Show. I admit that I have a negative bias toward this show, but I'm also not the target audience. Some of the advice given is out of touch and comes from a narrow conservative mindset in an appeal to the mostly white middle-class female audience. As mentioned earlier, the target audience for the Oprah Winfrey Show are mostly middle-class white women, and much of that audience tuned into this show as well. Putting therapy on national television is tricky to begin with. I've linked a BuzzFeed article that better summarizes several of the issues I have with Phil, such as the Dr. Phil family. The conflicts on the Dr. Phil Show are not always different than the Jerry Springer Show. It's just portrayed differently. Quote, "Dr. Phil is just Jerry Springer in a better suit," end quote. Much like how pro wrestling is low class in comparison to soap operas, the difference is that the participants in the Jerry Springer Show understand that it's a TV show and understand that it's trying to produce a product that will bring in viewers. In contrast, the Dr. Phil Show tries to evoke a more professional appearance. First, the name of the show implies that it involves a higher class of people. Second, the appearance of the audience and guests are different. Guests on the Jerry Springer Show are less likely to show up in Dockers or a suit. Lastly, the audience is encouraged to participate in Jerry Springer, while one should not dare question Mr. Phil. When scholars or organic experts are brought on, it's usually for a quick soundbite. These televised talk shows didn't always leave space to add a lot of nuance or explanation to information that was being presented. This makes it easier for experts that balance on the line of ethical or unethical to slip through the cracks, especially if they are able to package information in a short, easy to understand quip. In demonstrating that they are able to reach the audience, they will often get calls to appear on more shows. This can add more exposure to causes such as age education or SA survivor resources. Conversely, this can also push harmful and inaccurate narratives like toxic positivity or dangerous weight loss solutions. It's not just the experts though, as the producers can also create a situation that puts the expert in an awkward spot. Connie was an expert requested to appear on Randy for the topic of battered men and speak on how women are not the only victims of DV. She was given little information about the guests or what was going to happen, and during the day of the taping was isolated watching the first part of the show, taking notes in the green room. Quote, "What she heard quickly convinced her that she was witnessing textbook cases of battered women, that while these women might hit their husbands, they did so in retaliation for their husbands' violent actions, which included throwing them against walls and humiliating them in public. Yet the whole time, no one said a word to her backstage." End quote. When Connie was on stage, she did not agree that the men on stage were being battered and further explained that it was actually the women. This angered the producers, who said she was brought on the show specifically to discuss the topic of battered men, to which Connie replied, quote, "You didn't give me any battered men to say anything about. These are not battered men." End quote. According to Break the Silence, reactive abuse occurs when the victim reacts to the abuse they are experiencing. The victim may scream, toss out insults, or even lash out physically at the abuser. The abuser then retaliates by telling the victim that they are in fact the abuser." End quote. It's a manipulative tactic that is used to make the victim question their reality and role in the situation. For more information and resources on DV, I have linked to the website below. While the guests may have had the star treatment on the way into the show, they were certainly shuffled out with far less fanfare. Some guests were hesitant to appear because of what the aftermath would be. They might be a mini celebrity upon their return home, or they might be teased mercilessly because only certain people go on those type of talk shows. Earlier I mentioned the case around Scott Amager, and both Trial by Media and Dark Side of the 90s delve into whether or not the impact of trash TV impacted what occurred, and I would encourage you to check those out. Blaming media such as trash TV for being the cause of declining culture or influencing antisocial behavior does not help in addressing the root cause. Laura Grindstaff summarizes this concept in this quote, "Certain talk shows might take advantage of people in poverty or distress, but they do not create out of whole cloth the conditions of hardship under which many guests live. Indeed, it is telling that those who do bear some responsibility for these conditions, politicians who oppose increased spending for welfare and public education, for instance, are among the genre's most ardent critics, as if to suggest that the real problem is the cartoonish display of poverty on television rather than the actual fact of poverty itself. There is not one factor responsible for the perceived decline of American culture. But if I believed in such a decline and wanted someone or something to blame, talk shows are not the first place I would look." End quote. Trash TV was simply another form of entertainment, and many understood that, especially participants in the Jerry Springer Show. It's partly why some guests admitted that they considered using their appearance as a way to launch a career into modeling or acting. However, it is unlikely that a guest will come out of these shows and make a significant amount of money. Even if they do, there is still a stigma attached to them. For example, Danielle Bregoli was a guest on the Dr. Phil Show. According to Wikipedia, she was the youngest female rapper Billboard Artist Hot 100, has gold and platinum records, headlined a music tour, and was nominated for the 2018 Billboard Music Awards. Yet despite these accomplishments, much of middle-class America sees her as just an ill-behaved guest with a catchphrase on a talk show. She isn't poor anymore, but because she is from a low socioeconomic background and does not fit into the old-fashioned ideal of what rich should look and act like, she is not considered classy by viewers of the Dr. Phil Show. She also uses her position to advocate fixing problems associated with sending troubled youth to camps that might be traumatic and abusive. It also doesn't help that Phil doesn't own his own actions. Reality TV has its roots in trash TV. It's used many of the same tactics in shows like Survivor, Fear Factor, and Big Brother. There were a few others, such as The Simple Life, where Paris Hilton and Nicole Richie lived among the poor. While they started out making fun of their surroundings that they were placed in, as the show progressed, they started to show more compassion and understanding. And that doesn't make good TV. Over time, because producers wanted participants to look a certain way as well as act a certain way, the poor and marginalized started to disappear again. In shows like Love is Blind or The Bachelor, the participants usually match the westernized ideal of attractiveness and are not poor. If Love is Blind actually had people that looked like average people, it would have played out very differently and might actually be entertaining. I mention this show specifically because Damien acts exactly like an ex of mine that was passive-aggressive and manipulative in a way that most people did not always notice, but I see the signs. Many reality shows now focus on the rich and uber wealthy. While lifestyles of the rich and famous dabbled on the edges of life for the wealthy, Desperate Housewives and Keeping Up with the Kardashians brought a level of voyeurism into their privileged lives. Since these people involved have money and power, it's not trash TV, it's reality TV. Poor people usually don't have the luxury or resources to fight back if they are called trashy. At least the people working on the Jerry Springer Show appear to have more compassion. Richard Dominic, an executive producer on the show, said, quote, "They weren't trash people, they were good people. These are good, solid people who came on this show and probably had more guts than half the people out there who criticized them at the time," end quote. It doesn't mean that they didn't exploit their guests any less than any other talk shows, but at least they understood they were still people. In a nod to talk shows of that time, I'll end with my final thoughts. People are not trash. Not everyone has the same background and life is messy. Avoiding what makes us uncomfortable doesn't solve underlying issues. Classifying a group of people as being lesser than chips away at our compassion, and at what point does it stop? Trash TV is just another form of entertainment, and we need to stop punching down because it doesn't raise us any higher. I'm SCB, and thank you for coming to my TED Talk.
People, space monsters, this is going nowhere. There's only one man who can settle an argument this bizarre.
Okay, we're back. Homer, how did it feel to learn your baby was fathered by a drooling space octopus?
It made me angry, Jerry. Angry and tired.
Well, you're about to get a whole lot angrier because we have the extramarital extraterrestrial backstage in a soundproof booth where he can't hear us.
I hear all.